Hello. Yes, we
Hello.
are live. Hello.
Yay.
I can see Lisa's here already. Hi, Lisa. So, welcome. This is the live chat for Spin the Dawn by Elizabeth Lim. We may slightly get into Unravel the Dusk as well. And as always, we'll start off spoiler free and then slip into the spoilers a little bit later on. I am joined by Elle, who I'm sure you're familiar with, but Elle, I will allow you to introduce yourself anyway, just in case.
Well, thanks. Hello, I'm Elle, and I have a channel that similarly to Sophia's is primarily focused on fantasy. I read a mix of young adult and adult fantasy, and occasionally we'll read something outside of the genre, but that's the main thing. You can usually tell by the books behind me.
Yeah. And Elle's channel will, of course, be linked in the description. I think it works, but I had to do it offline. So if it hasn't worked, I will edit it and make sure that it does work once we come back off. So I think we've both read both of these books. When did you read them?
I started Spin the Dawn in 2020, toward the beginning of the year. You can kind of determine when you've read things based off of what point of the illness
Yeah.
was occurring, and I think it was around the beginning. And I have a very vivid memory. It's kind of a sad memory, but a very vivid memory of my dad being in the hospital, and I couldn't visit him, and so I was kind of sitting in the back, and the weather was nice, and I was trying to read this book to keep my mind occupied and not stress. And I think that's one of the reasons that I do have this sort of attachment to this duology, is because it gave me that, and it kind of gave me the warm fuzzies and something. I mean, we talk about escapism sometimes in a negative way or a derogatory way, but I think that's part of what makes books great, is they help you get through stuff. And so I was reading Spin the Dawn around the beginning of 2020, and then once Unravel the Dusk came out, I think I picked it up right around its release date, which I'm forgetting now when that was, but it wasn't, I don't think, too long after that.
No, I think they came out pretty close together.
And I didn't pick up Spin the Dawn right when it came out, because I think it was a 2019 release. Maybe.
I will check. That sounds right to me.
Everybody was reading it, and I hadn't read it, and then I eventually got around to it.
Oh, my copy is the Fairy Loot one, so it just says 2021, which is not especially helpful.
I could check. Mine's behind me over here, but
it's fine. I'm pretty sure it was 2019. I'm sure it was before the Panini, so
yes.
It must be.
I always love everybody's different words for it.
Yeah.
I like the food ones make it sound much better than it was.
Yeah, I like when Jess calls it the Pandora's box, because I'm like so apt.
I think her favorite is personal pan pizza. She says that a lot too. I always say the illness because it gets the point across, and I always feel like I'm stealing someone else's creative word if I say something else. Anyway, like anybody's got copyright or something to it.
Oh, you'll have to all let us know in the chat when you read this. I, of course, have just read it in January, and then I very quickly, well, straight away, read the sequel, Unravel the Dusk. I found the writing style of both of the books really easily digestible and compulsive to read. How did you find it?
I think so too. I think it was definitely not a dense writing style. There's a hint of something somewhat lyrical to it, and I don't know if that's necessarily the writing or this sense of almost fairy tale that you feel like you're getting with it, because the way she describes things, I think, feels very fantastical, fairy tale, and sort of, it doesn't feel grounded necessarily, but there's of course different kinds of fantasy. There's the fantasy that feels very real and the emotions are very raw, and then this one, it feels like I'm transported. And so I think the writing style was definitely very, like you said, easily digestible, but it like compulsive is a good way to word it, because I definitely always wanted to come back to it And I think because it made me feel like I was being taken to this place. And I also think Maya is the main character, I believe, right? I haven't
Yeah.
listened to it, so I'm not sure if that's how they pronounce it.
Yeah,
But
yeah, it is.
I I always liked her point of view also.
Hmm.
And I just felt like I don't know, I felt for her very quickly. I felt for her situation and for
Yeah.
the fact that she really wanted to do what was best for her family. And I really liked her a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. And I agree with you that it feels almost fairy tale or parable like it feels like it's going to be a familiar story even though you don't actually know what's going to
Mhm.
happen. I mean, a lot of the time you can probably guess where it's going, but you don't, it's not like a retelling of something. So yeah, and I liked Maya too. Thought that the author did a really good job of making us like her really quickly and feel for her and connect to her really quickly. Yeah, Lisa
I
liked it.
agree. Mhm. And I
Yeah.
liked oh, go ahead.
No, no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I liked I know this was not everyone's favorite, but I liked that the story became bigger than I expected. And I
Yeah.
think the traveling aspect of the story and this kind of uh almost like they weren't it's not sci-fi, it's not like an across the galaxy type of love story, but it almost felt that way.
Mm,
And I ended up liking that it took that direction. I know a lot of other people weren't quite a fan of that, but in general, I just thought it was like you said, it feels something like it's something familiar. So it feels very cozy. And I think for some other people, because I know that it's got some mixed reviews, but I think for some people, the beginning is this really interesting. I mean, how often do you see a tailor in a competition and the whole Project Runway meets Mulan? You wouldn't think that would come together. But I like that it went away from that a little bit. I can understand why some people maybe felt like they were tricked by the. Oh,
yeah,
yes. To add to that, I also enjoyed the traveling.
yeah,
But as far as like you said, you can sometimes maybe predict where it's going to go.
yeah,
And I don't want to touch too much on the sequel, but I wasn't sure. It was one of those I'm like, I don't know if she's going to make me very sad or very happy at the end of this book. I'm
yeah,
not quite positive, and I like that I wasn't 100% positive.
yeah, yeah. It's nice when it's predictable enough that it feels comfortable and it feels familiar, but not so predictable that you do know exactly what's going to happen. So I quite enjoyed that about it, and I quite liked that we very quickly established the familial bonds that were
Mhm.
there. Like just in the first few pages we could see how important family was to her, so that was good. I mean, I don't do you have anything else that you want to discuss, sort of non-spoilery, or shall we start getting into the spoilers?
And we can dive right in. It's been a little bit, so it's gonna be fresher,
Yeah,
I think, in your mind than it is in mine, but I'm probably gonna forget character names. Ugh,
yeah,
I've
I mean
gotten
I
so
probably will
bad
as well.
with character names in the last few years, but yeah, I'm happy to dive into spoilers.
Cool. Okay, so we're diving into spoilers now, everyone. You have been warned. I suppose I should probably put a banner up saying
Spoilers.
that.
I am excited. Have you read Six Crimson Cranes?
Yes, I
Okay,
have.
so I'm excited for in that second one because I guess we're talking spoilers. I'm not saying spoilers for Six Crimson Cranes, but in Spin the Dawn and Unravel the Dusk, when Eden mentions the character from Six Crimson Cranes,
Yes.
and I think we're gonna see maybe him pop up in the sequel to that, which I
Hmm.
think that's fun. It'll
Yeah,
probably
I
just be like a
noticed that.
little thing, but I liked his character. I thought he was a lot of fun, so I'm excited to
Yeah.
see him again.
Yeah, and I can't remember whether this was in Spin the Dawn or in Unravel the Dusk, to be fair, because I think it might have been in Unravel the Dusk, but it's not really a spoiler anyway. There was like a paper bird thing. So I thought
Ah.
that was really cute because I read Six Crimson Cranes before I had read Spin the Dawn. I think probably one of the main things that people talk about when they talk about Spin the Dawn is the fact that the synopsis that is written on the book is not really the synopsis of the story that you get. So I guess we can get into that a little bit. It's almost like a book of two halves. So you've got the first
Yeah.
half, which is like the competition trope thing, and then the second half, which is like the traveling trope thing. Did you have a preference over either section?
I don't think so. I thought it was I guess once we finished the competition aspect, I almost think I was excited because I had no idea where it was going to go from. I mean, we talked about predictability. So you have some idea of like she's probably going to fall in love and then she's going to maybe have some choices to make in regards to like her family and her own self and this person she's falling in love with, and I figured those sorts of things would come up, but I wasn't expecting it because the synopsis sort of only, but in a way, I kind of like that because I'm sure you've come across this too. Sometimes the synopsis tells you
Way
almost
too
the whole
much.
book. They'll
Mm,
give you too much. And I don't know for other people that end up watching this. Red Rising is a kind of book that you could have just told me it's a class system broken up into colors, and some are definitely treated better than others. But the synopsis reveals what I think is a pretty hard hitting moment from earlier on.
mm,
And I'm so glad that I didn't read the synopsis first. So I understand why it feels like you maybe get tricked when you read the synopsis of Spin the Dawn and then it turns into this traveling fairy tale love story kind of. But I liked both. I don't think I had a preference to which chunk I liked more.
I was really nervous. Not really, no, that's overstating it. I was a bit nervous going in because I don't typically like the whole traveling quest type story. It's probably part of what I struggle with Wheel of Time is I'm not about that whole we have to go to the place to get the thing, to do the thing, and then move on to do the
Yes.
next place. And that whole trope doesn't generally work for me, but surprisingly enough, I actually quite enjoyed the traveling section. And I think it's because the way that she wrote it still almost felt like a little bit of a competition because she'd been in the competition with all of the other tailors, and now she was almost in a competition against herself to actually prove that she could collect these items. And of course, it helped that Eden was there, and he was a really interesting character as well. So I I was quite surprised that I enjoyed that, but I do think it was a good thing that I had known that that was going to happen from watching you talk about the book before, that this was going to happen. If I hadn't known that, I might have struggled with it a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's just a matter of if I'm going into a book expecting this great competition and then I only
Mm,
get that for a little bit, then yeah. And I don't know why for me, I knew that that was the way it had been marketed. Like we talked about the Project Runway meets Mulan, but I guess in this instance, even though I just said if I was expecting this great competition, I just wasn't. I think I was anticipating because I'd seen some negative reviews that her passion would also disappear once the competition part was over, but her passion for this hobby, this craft that she's masterful at, I feel like was always a part of the story. It just got more and more magical as it went. And
mm-hmm.
I liked that. And I'm always a sucker for character relationships, whether they're romantic or familial or whatever the case may be, friend,
Yeah.
platonic. And in the beginning, when it's a competition, she's so isolated. There is that other character that she kind of becomes friends with, but she can't reveal everything to them.
Mm-hmm.
So having Eden and her communicate more, I enjoyed that because she's not so isolated at that point like she was at the
Yeah.
competition. So you get those character moments, and I actually feel like we got to know her a little bit more too because she's been living so long for the well-being of her family that she hasn't, I feel like, gotten the opportunity to sort of find her own self. And I
Mhm.
don't want to say, because I feel like this sounds wrong. I don't want to say like she figured out who she was because of Eden or something, but she had this opportunity and this quest for these things to
Yeah.
also find herself a little bit, as cheesy as that sounds.
Yeah, because he knew what and who she was the whole time, and so
Hmm.
she didn't have to pretend, she didn't have to be any different to who she actually is. And I think even to a certain extent with her family, she had to do that because she had to take on the feminine sort of motherly role, looking after her whole family and dealing with the loss of her mother and her brothers. She felt that responsibility. Whereas with Eden, she could just be Maya and be who she was and not have to mother him or look after him or anything like that. So it allowed her to grow and be more herself.
Hmm.
So I liked that.
And I don't know if you feel this way too, but anytime I find a character where I'm like, I just want you to get a break. I just want you to have some peace and some happiness
Mm.
because she's been living so long for her family and she's doing whatever she can to help them. And then when, she's finding herself, if you will, in this quest, but also like Eden kind of brings her this little bit of joy, and there's no obligation necessarily to it. It's just like, I mean, again, it's not as fresh in my mind, but that's part of why I liked their relationship is I feel like she she got to step away from the obligation, and she got to find like what it was to have joy with another person, that there wasn't this heaviness, this
Hmm.
burden of she loves her family, but at the same time it's like she couldn't ever really reveal just how sad she was because she had to be strong for them. And then she had to also, just in general, I feel like there's that double-edged sword of she loves them, but because she loves them so much, she can't show her full emotions and her
Hmm.
struggles. Anyway, I like
And
her
the same
character.
with her talent as well. Like, she had to hide behind her father's name and pretend. Even before she was actively pretending to be him or her brother, she was still kind of pretending to be them because she couldn't step up and be like, hey,
Yeah.
that awesome dress you love? That was actually me. Thank you.
Yes.
And now now she actually can, which I felt happy for her, which I think is a really skillful thing for the author to be able to do, is to make me genuinely feel like, yay, I'm so happy that you get to make these dresses and be like, yeah, that was mine. I
Still
killed
in
it.
disguise, but at least the spotlight is on her.
Yeah.
And I also think, as far as the relationships with her family go, if I'm not mistaken, her mother is basically never in the story because she's already passed away,
Yeah,
right? And
that's right.
I felt
Yeah.
that loss and that sadness from not having her, even though we never
Mm,
really, I think you see her in like snippets at the beginning when you're getting
yeah.
her kind of life story very quickly.
Memories and things. Yeah.
And I don't know, I was so sad for her. That's why I said the whole time I was like, I just want you to be happy. I just want you to get a moment where you just get to be at peace.
Yeah. Especially because the way that I understood it was that, her mother was gone and her father was kind of gone as well. He was like still actually there, but he wasn't really there anymore. He was very absent because he just missed his wife so much, which is so sad.
I know.
Uh, and then she loses her brothers as well. It's just very tragic. And then we still end up with this quite hopeful story, even with all of that tragedy, which I can't help but contrast it with the Poppy War, which have you read?
Yeah, I read the first one.
Yeah, I've only read the first one as well. And that one just kind of leans into the tragedy and is like, yeah, it starts off bad and let's get worse. Whereas
Yes.
this one is like, we're really sad, but let's make it, let's find those silver linings and see improvements for our
There's no
character.
silver linings in the Poppy War.
No,
It's like, look at the horrors of war. That's what this is all about.
no, we wouldn't speak any spoilers, but suffice it to say, very different vibe
Yes.
to this book. Not even close. So we've kind of touched on Eden a little bit, but what did you think of Eden generally as a character?
I remember just thinking I mean, he was a little ridiculous, and uh I don't want to say he was annoying, but he liked to like pester her a little bit and be sneaky, and I thought he was I don't know how to word this. It was almost like he was the perfect character to have in her life, even if
Mm,
sometimes he was like a mildly annoying character. No, I don't know if anyone here is going to know this reference, but it's like the characters Titus and Yuna from Final Fantasy X, where Titus is like kind of a little bit a lot, he's this big personality, but the way that him and the other character Yuna interact, it's just like, aw, and you just can't help but be like, oh, they're so cute. That's kind of how I felt with him and her. But him on his own, I feel like he was one of those characters that he would be over the top and he would be silly sometimes because he's hiding
mm,
his own things too. So it's like, and again, it's not as fresh for me, but he has this really sad, like he had to go down this path. At first, it was propelled by ambition, if I'm not mistaken.
mm.
And then after that, he kind of got caught up in this it's not a curse, but it's like a, what is it called when he has this, what is it again? It's almost like the way a genie is like tied to the
Yeah,
person
yeah.
who give the wishes to.
I can't think of the word. I'm sure it begins with a C, and I can't remember what it was.
But he's tethered to this
Yeah.
other person. And you're just like, I want the both of you to just be free of, but his is a magical, like he has to follow through with this, and then hers is more a personal. Uh yes, I
Yeah.
liked him too. Oh, I see the thing about the scissors.
Yes.
I
So the
like that.
scissors.
I liked the way, one, I mean it's fun, and it's I feel like part of what makes this feel fairy tale-esque is there's not a hard magic system in the story.
No,
It's just
not
like,
at all.
here's a magical pair of scissors from your family. And the other aspects of the story too, it's just kind of like, this is how it is. It's almost like the way you find like this curse was placed on this person because of something they did and they upset this witch, and she, whatever kind of, however you
Mm,
want to describe it. Very soft. But I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed this, the fact that it had been kind of passed down too.
yeah,
This is significance of the women in her family that she really didn't get to have that connection to, but she sort of has this shared bond through this.
yeah. I did think it was really interesting. It comes back to this point again about her wanting to kind of make something of herself, was that she was so reluctant. Once she knew what the scissors were and how they worked and what they could do, she didn't want to use them, even though Eden in particular kept saying, well, everyone else is going to do whatever they can to win this thing. So you've got these scissors, you can use them, you can make the magic work. Why wouldn't you do that? And she's like, no, because to I want to win this accolade because I'm worthy of it. And I think Eden's right. No one else would have done that. Which
I
just
I
speaks
I,
to her character.
I can kind of understand too that feeling, because of course everybody in life has a different amount of uh privilege. I don't mean that in like the social way that we describe, but
Mm,
literally everybody comes into the world with some different set of circumstances. And I think there are a lot of people who they want to do everything themselves and they want to earn everything themselves. And then they feel guilt anytime something kind of works in their favor because they see all these other people who haven't had that. And in her case, it's like everybody else likely has had a lot more going for them, and she still
mm,
feels like she can't take advantage of this one thing that she's got going for her because she feels like it's wrong to embrace that. And even though it's, a magical pair of scissors, I still feel like that's very relatable because there's plenty of times where I think a lot of us look on our own, we reflect on what we have, and we're like, oh, but I wouldn't have gotten here if I didn't have this. And then that kind of guilt wrapped around that.
yeah.
But then also, I think Eden is like, okay, it's okay to use these things that you have going for you, but as long as they don't change you or warp you into something else. And she
Hmm.
always stayed the nice person that she was.
Yeah. Yeah.
I liked
Exactly.
Maya. I thought she was kind of an
Yeah.
inspiring character.
I really liked her too. I really didn't like the I. I'm also awful with names. I have no idea what his name was, but he was the really mean other competitor who like kept spilling tea on her dresses and ruining her stuff.
There's always that character that's just rotten.
Yeah, yeah, he was not a nice man. And of course, it's all rigged in his favor because naturally. But I felt really kind of proud of Maya in that moment. Do you remember the scene with the fire where she basically she goes back to rescue everybody else's dresses, even though it puts her in danger? I was like, yeah, because you're the good person and
I
you do what's
know.
right, even if it's gonna harm you,
This is
literally
one of
or
those
figuratively.
this is one of those stories where it's become much more popular to have either villainous main characters, anti-heroes, morally gray heroes. You know, we want to see the good and the bad. And every
Mm,
now and then it's nice to get a character that you're like, you're basically just a good person. It's
yeah,
just, I don't know, every now and then I'm like, oh yeah, there are heroes that we can root for. And don't get me wrong, I love reading about the like, oh man, that's you shouldn't be doing that. Like I really love those characters, or the ones that
hmm,
are so messed up that in their mind what they're doing makes sense, but you're like, it's not a, you shouldn't do that. But even though it's fun to feel conflicted as to whether or not you should like Glockta is a character that you're like, I don't know if I should like you, but I do. I kind of love you. But she's just you're like you feel okay liking her, and you feel like she's inspirational and she's heroic, and it makes you feel like, you know, like, hey, I can be a good person and things can work out for me maybe.
yeah, yeah,
Or if you try to be a good, I'm not trying to say that like I'm as heroic as her, but I just mean I don't know that most of us are like relatable to Glockta per se from
no,
First Law, but I would more so relate to Maya. And
mm,
you know, seeing this good person have to persevere through these difficult circumstances, it's I maybe it's part of it being young adult, but I think it's like you said, there's this hopeful kind of current underneath the whole story that you can be good and you can follow your dreams, and maybe you won't always get the credit or maybe you won't always get to shine, and but you got to do it because it's important to be a good person. I don't know. Maybe that's silly.
no, I don't think it is. I think it is nice because I think often when there is that sort of more quintessentially good character, they're more of like a side character,
Yeah.
often more so than a main character. So it was kind of nice to have a main character that she started off as a good person and she stayed a good person, like even through all of these horrible situations that she was placed in, she still, even to the very end and the decisions she was making at the end of the book to send Eden away to rescue him, even though she knew that she was in trouble, she stayed true to that really nice, kind, good person all the way through, when maybe many other characters would have been like, well, this is going really badly for me, so maybe I should not always be so nice to everybody, and
Mhm.
maybe I should make some decisions that are going to benefit me in the long run. So that was definitely
It's
nice.
nice to see nice people in books sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, that's the overall message.
Yeah. Nice people are nice. I just read a book where, which I loved it a lot, but I just read a book where a character is constantly going back and forth as to whether he should do the kind of like selfish thing or whether he should. The other thing is, it doesn't matter. I don't need to get into details, but like you get into the thoughts of like, oh, who cares? I should just do this over here. And you're like, I don't know. Um, and I don't feel like there was ever a moment where I'm like, Maya, no. I never really had that moment. I was like, good for you. And you know what? I don't know about you, but I sometimes reading about really, really nice, like actual real people doing nice things makes me emotional. I think it can be
Hmm.
very emotional and impactful. And like you were saying, where she goes back, it's like, oh, even though I feel like this is rigged, and even though some of these other people would never do the same for you, it's still nice that you would do that for them because maybe you can change them. Maybe they can see, not that I'm saying that, you know, traditional, but like the pay it forward. Maybe if you show them something they've never seen before, maybe they've never seen that kind of kindness and lack of selfishness. Maybe they've never seen it, so maybe they'll be better now.
Yeah, yeah. It's like in that this is a really random thing to remember and mention, but there was the scene where she's about to be attacked by the wolves, and Eden is off in hawk or eagle or whatever it is form. So she's on her own, and she's like, she doesn't think about the fact that maybe she's about to be eaten by a wolf. She's like, oh no, the camels are going to be eaten by the wolf. Let me set them free. So the camels go off, and then she just like tries to hide in a tree. I'm like, I wish more books would do stuff like this, because how many fantasy novels have I read where they're like, yeah, just kill all the horses. Like the humans can be fine, but all the horses have got to die.
We were just before I recorded this, we were recording I was recording something for World Hoppers, and we were talking about this very thing, that when animals die, and especially in fantasy, because there's always all these armies, right? And and I'm like, don't go for the horses. I know strategically, I understand that if you can get them off their horse, I get it, but also don't stab the horse. Don't hit him with your spear. That's sad. They didn't make that decision, okay? They didn't choose that side.
Poor innocent transport animals just getting killed left and right just because they happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Because they got you from point A to point B.
Yeah.
That's all they ever did. They gave you a ride.
or they're being run so hard that they are being like literally killed because
yes, like, oh, I ran the horse. Yes, I ran it to exhaustion and it's gonna die now, but I had to do it. And I was like, nah, dang. I mean, sometimes I get it, but also it's sad.
Yeah. You have legs too. You could run.
Yeah, yourself. Don't be lazy. I agree with
the person who literally never runs anywhere.
I mean, in a fantasy story, as long as the animals don't die. I agree with the comment though, that I love when I can root for a character. Yeah. I mean, I love when I hate a character and I'm not sure, okay, I love to hate like a really good antagonist. Yes. Of course, it's great. And then I also love when I feel like a bad person for loving a mean, awful character. And I'm like, oh, but they're kind of funny. Or like, oh, but whatever the case may be. But also, I just like it all. It's not for everybody. I think that some people, they find it a little vanilla and a little bland to have these characters that are just goody two shoes. But it depends on the mood I'm in.
Not well enough.
Roller skates. I don't have the balance for roller skates.
Well, I mean, neither do I, but hey, I'm still in one piece for now, at least. I'm reading the Live Ship Traders series by Robin Hobb at the moment, and no spoilers, of course, but she is a really, really good author. For that is, she'll have awful characters that you feel really bad that you love them, and then she has other characters that you just hate them with a fiery passion, and some of them are protagonists and some of them are just, your side bad guys and antagonists, and she's got the full range of emotions towards characters in all of these different kinds of roles. Whereas, yes, I agree with you, Lisa, that the guy who kept winning in the tailoring competition was very much a mustache twirling bad guy type that was just like, oh, ha, 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 I'm gonna trick everyone and I'm gonna win this thing, and yay, that's good for me, and I don't care about any of you.
And honestly, that's how it is sometimes, though. Sometimes the rotten people get ahead.
Yeah. It's like I was on the tube. This is really random. I was on the tube on Friday coming home, and this big old white guy, he was like quite broad-shouldered. He came and sat on the tube next to me, and he just like muscled me out of the way so he could sit the way that he wanted to. And I was like, do you know what? If that isn't just a stereotype literally right there.
Yeah. But it's more comfortable, so. I felt, again, we're on side tangents now, but there was one time I was on a plane and it was the first time my dad had flown on a plane in I don't know how long, like 20 or more years. And I really wanted to make sure we were sitting together. And we had gone toward the back of the plane. It was one of those, like, you can pick your own seats. And we were going to go toward the back, so that way, like, if one of us had to use the restroom or something, we were right near the restrooms. And we walk all the way back there, and the flight attendants are like, oh, these are for the snacks. Like, they were going to put the snack boxes there. And we're like, oh. And we went to turn around, but now there's, like, a whole line of people in the aisle trying to find their own seats. So then no one would move. There were still open seats, but you know how people are. I get it. On planes, like, you have the window seat and the aisle seat. Nobody wants to sit in the middle. So there were some middle seats open, and nobody was willing to go from where they were sitting. They weren't even with family members, some of them. They didn't want to move to one middle seat so that my dad and I could sit together. So then I was sitting between some random person who just, like, looked out the window the whole time, which was fine. And this woman with her baby and her husband, her other kids were behind her. And look, I feel bad for people who have to fly with little babies. Yeah. I can only imagine how stressful. But she kept having the baby's feet toward me, and the baby, like, kept kicking me. And she wouldn't, like, reposition or say, like, oh, I'm sorry. And the baby just kept, at one point, like, it kicked me in the head too, because I was, like, trying to put my head down on the little tray. And I'm just like, this sucks. Like, I was so annoyed, but I didn't say anything. But anyway, just like, yeah, I don't know. If I saw that, I'd be like, I would move. If I was alone and I wasn't with, like, my dad or a significant other or something, and I saw that a couple or two people, and my dad was old, and I'm like, seriously, you guys aren't going to let me sit with him? So
Maya would move.
Maya would have moved. That's the whole point. That's the moral of this whole story.
Yeah, Maya so we weren't off topic. The topic was, what would Maya do?
What would Maya do? That should be a video of, like, what would these characters do?
Yeah.
In these awful circumstances. Yeah, she would have, Lisa. She would have.
She would have.
She's nice.
She would have sat on the floor if she had to.
You know? Yep. Eden would have probably, like, joked around about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Or get, like, really unreasonably mad and been like, you will move. So the challenges that she has to do in the second half of the book, those were slightly more unexpected. I thought I kind of, the first half of the book seemed more predictable to me, and then the second half of the book, the character stuff was still kind of predictable, but the plot stuff, not so much. Like, I didn't necessarily see the stuff with all the demons and things coming, and then all of a sudden we've got demons everywhere and she's battling a demon. I'm like, where did this come from? I didn't see any of this coming. What did you think about that?
I think for a while I just said a second ago that it became more abstract in a sense, because some of the things that she was supposed to get, I'm like, is she literally getting, like,
yes, yeah,
or is this just, like, what they call this thing? So it definitely took a turn, but I kind of liked it. I mean, the stakes, for a while the stakes were almost, I don't want to say small, they were more personal. They were like more intimate stakes for a while, and then the stakes became very different and more, I feel like I can't even say life or death, because for her and her family, her situation was kind of life or death in a sense. But it became more literally in your face, magical life or death. And I think it became, you said it before, the first book is essentially two different books. And it was almost like the first half was its own book, and then the second chunk was like the middle book of a trilogy, and the third book was like the long conclusion. It almost actually felt like 4 books, because the first half of the first book was kind of the setup, starts smaller, and then the second chunk, it's like, oh, it's getting much bigger and we have to go to all these places and do all these things. And I don't want to spoil the second one because I don't think everybody necessarily has read it. But for the first half of the second one, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to love this. And it also it becomes kind of political. And then the last chunk is kind of the last battle and the last hurrah sort of thing. So it almost feels like 4 short stories in a sense. Maybe not short stories, but it almost feels like it was a quartet that had a bind up, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that does make sense. And I suppose it kind of fits with that parable-esque type style of writing, because those tend to be shorter sort of stories, what we would now think of as novellas, I guess. But I think I definitely didn't like the second one as much as I liked
Mm.
this first one. And I think it is because this one felt a lot more intimate in general. The scope of things really widened up, I thought, in the second one. And so you've kind of got this first half where she's taking on the responsibility for her family and providing for them and protecting them. And then really what she's doing in the second half is she's taking on like the whole land. Like, if I
Mm-hmm.
don't make this dress, this impossible, well, dresses, in fact, if I don't make these impossible dresses, then this woman isn't going to marry our king, and then there's going to be war, and lots more people are going to die, and I don't want others to lose their brothers like I lost mine. So she's gone from taking on just the responsibility for her family to taking on the responsibility for everyone's families, which
Mm-hmm.
is a very Maya thing to do, but it starts to move towards that wider scope that we then see continue, I think, in the second book.
It's like she's a character in someone else's story and she plays an important role. Is kind of how it felt in the second one. Um, but I liked it overall. I know a lot of people I think felt similar to you. They didn't I've looked at reviews and it seems that people didn't love the second one. Um, but I liked the story as a whole, but I think that how you described it is accurate. And now to be all silly and artsy, it kind of reminds me of I almost don't want to say the tone of the last movement, but there's this sonata that I love. And I'll say the tone of the first three movements. So the first movement is like kind of pretty and hopeful and like there's a sense of sadness to it almost. And I feel like that's sort of the beginning of this story. And then
Mm-hmm.
the second movement is very agitated and kind of angry sounding. And I feel like that's the second half of Spin the Dawn where there's like so much happening. And
Yeah.
then the third movement of it is very sad. And I feel like the first half of Unravel the Dusk is just such a bummer for a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're like, "Hi, is this gonna be like a really, really, really sad story?" And then, you know, you find out. And I don't that's why I don't want to say what the mood of the last movement is of this piece, but I'm like, it kind of feels like a sonata, from beginning to
Mm-hmm.
end. It's a full story. Obviously, it's literally a full story, but I just mean it takes you through all the
Yeah.
emotions.
Mm-hmm. I can't remember her name or title either, but I know who you mean. And I do feel like we understand her a bit better by the end of the second book, but certainly in this book, she did just seem to be quite vindictive, regardless of, what who it was that she was dealing with. She kind of, she didn't want to be nice to basically anyone. Yeah.
I know. I almost want to see if I were to reread the first one, if I would feel like some of her behavior was, I don't want to say justified, but if I would understand it or if I would think like, no, you
Mm,
really didn't have to be that way.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't I yeah, I understand now why she was behaving the way she was, but I still think that she shouldn't
I
have been taking that out on
um
people.
I know you'll know this reference, of course, but it's like seeing Yasna at the beginning of Way of Kings. And I'm like, you
Mm,
were really mean. She's super mean for a while. I was like, really? You didn't have to. I mean, you can be blunt without being just cruel. She was kind of cruel,
mm,
but I think this was a much more extreme version.
yes.
Yasna's not
Yeah.
quite like that, but for me, it was like I grew to like Yasna, and then when I went back, I'm like, oh, you were mean, but I mean, I eventually like you. Where in this, it was like, oh, you're terrible, and then I'm like, well, maybe there's reasons for it.
Yeah. 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 I think, funnily enough, with Yasna, maybe because I never really warmed to Shallan at all. I was just like, yeah. So.
That's what you get.
Yeah.
I don't probably want to keep talking about Stormlight, otherwise we'll be here for a long time. Which
we could.
I have them on my shelf now. Those I can actually show them. These
Oh yeah.
editions.
Nice.
Yeah. They look great.
Pretty.
Anyway, but that's not a Stormlight. Speaking of great, I'm curious because you're in the UK and I feel like UK readers, you guys always get better covers. But I gotta say the US covers for these are gorgeous.
They're
Also,
really
just a
nice.
very different style. But the artist who does the covers for these, I think does all colored pencil. And that's amazing. You can see on their Instagram the process, and it's ridiculous. Yeah. And it's they're the kind of covers that I think once you've read the story, you notice details a lot more.
Yeah.
And I think these are beautiful and they have similar details. But the Fairy Loot editions are the only ones that I know of right now that come in hardcovers. And the UK editions that have come out are not in hardcovers, but they have different colors. And those are, I mean, they're all pretty. But these next 6 Crimson Cranes, oh my gosh.
Yes. Yeah. I really like the way that they do match. So you've got these two that match with my copy of 6 Crimson Cranes is in the other room, so I can't show you. But it's a similar art style. I don't know if the artist is the same. I presume so. But it's a very similar art style, and I like the fact that they kind of go together, especially because they are actually set in the same worlds. They don't follow the same characters, but they could virtually be companion stories. So I kind of like that.
I think for me with this duology, I think Elizabeth Lim's writing, not her writing style, but just her stories that I've read so far, they feel a little bit on the younger side of young adult. I've mentioned that a lot in talking about 6 Crimson Cranes, but I think Spin the Dawn too. Strangely, I think 6 Crimson Cranes is maybe even more Disney, I'll say. But young adult is such an interesting age range because 12 to 18, I mean, a 12-year-old and 18-year-old are very different people. Even if it's the same kid, between those years, it's going to be a totally different person. And I think that makes the books you pick up so different from one to the next. And because I think publishing industry, I'm not an expert or anything, but it would seem they're very aware that a lot of the people who pick up young adult are adults and they're not 12-year-olds. And so you've seen this age range genre, whatever you want to call it, sort of start to cater a little bit to an older audience. And what I like about these Elizabeth Lim's books is they feel like the young adult books that I would, it's going to sound maybe not saying, a 12-year-old can't read like Six of Crows or something, but this is a story that I think I could lend to a 12-year-old and not be like, oh yeah, and there's a part where like someone's eye gets like anyway, you don't have to worry about like the really intense violence or things like that. And again, I just want to reiterate, I'm not trying to say that kids can't read those books, but it feels a little bit younger. It feels a little bit more wholesome, but it doesn't shy away from the heavier moments, like what we've talked about with her family and the loss and things like that. So it feels like what I haven't been seeing anymore or as often in young adult. And I kind of miss it, I think there's so many readers out there that I want to make sure there's books for them too. So it's like I feel nostalgic, even though I didn't grow up with this. It reminds me of something of a younger time, if that makes any sense. Not that we're old currently, but it makes me sometimes think of that childlike wonder and sense of adventure and everything.
Exactly. I think, that was definitely something that I missed, I guess, when I was sort of that 13, 14, 15 age, that YA didn't exist then in the way that it did now. So I kind of had to just go from kids' books to adults' books. And it can be a bit tricky. Like I remember when I was about, I don't know, maybe I was 14 or so, and I picked up, I think I've spoken to you about it before, the Symphony of Ages series by Elizabeth Haydn. which is a bit of an older kind of epic fantasy type series. And I picked it up because a friend of mine had recommended it to me. And I remember being like really scandalized because there was like a sex scene early on in the book. And I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be reading this. Like, I was like, shh, don't tell my mom. I don't want to get in trouble. Like,
that's kind of precious. I mean, okay. I don't know if you've ever heard of the series. I feel like nobody's ever talked about it. The first one, what is the first one called? Oh no. The author's name is John Marco. It's an adult fantasy trilogy. And I think that one of them's called like The Devil's Armor, one of them's called The Eyes of God, and it's not religious. It's just the name of the items in the book or whatever. And yeah, there's definitely some not super detailed sex scenes or anything, but there's a lot of it was for adults, and I was reading it in middle school, and I randomly read it alongside my mom. Like I read it and then she picked it up. My mom and I, it's funny because I feel like I'm definitely very like goody two shoes, and she's always like, how did I end up with such like a wholesome daughter? Because my mom like curses and like enjoys alcohol and things like that. Anyway, but so we read it and we would talk about it and stuff. But it was strange because I read that in middle school, and then after that read the Bartimaeus trilogy, which I think is technically middle grade.
Yeah.
And it was just so strange because, like you said, there really wasn't. It I don't even think it was called middle grade when I was that age. I think it was called young readers. And it went from young readers to just fantasy sci-fi. And so it was hard to find. I almost feel like part of why I like this story so much is it's that story I wish that I'd had when I was, 10, 11, 12. I don't know, whatever I was reading. It was such a weird, it was just such a weird mix. So I guess maybe it makes me happy because I also have nieces. I mentioned this about Six Crimson Cranes specifically all the time, but I'm just like, they're almost at that age where I can start being like, you want to borrow Thea's books? And I can lend them out, which sounds fun.
Yeah, that'll be nice. That'll be nice. It's definitely, it is at that younger end, and I think that that is a good thing because you're right that to a certain extent that is being lost because the publishers know, well, actually, the majority of our young adult audience are actually young adults, like rather than teenagers, which is what I think YA was originally supposed to be for. But then I feel like if you labeled it as teenage fiction, I think you'd alienate teenagers from reading it because they'd be like, I don't want to read a teenage book. I want to read a YA book.
My family is not exactly filled with readers, and I remember kind of chatting with my uncle about I guess you could say sticking up of your nose at various different things, right? Like the ways that one genre looks down on another, one age range looks down on another, whatever. And I was explaining the way that some people just always think lesser of young adult. And he was really confused at first because he's like, I don't understand. Like, you are a young adult. And I was like, young adult's technically 12 to 18. And he was like, he thought that was brilliant. He was like, what a great way to make them want to read, because then it makes them feel like they're young adults and stuff. And it was just interesting to see that perspective from someone who doesn't read at all. But yeah, it is. And I think it branches out even into, I know my husband had a coworker, I think she was in her 50s or 60s, and she loved Wheel of Time and she loved Throne of Glass. Like, she just liked whatever. If it was fantasy, she was down to pick it up. And anyway, to the original point though, of it feels like we're starting to lose that. It makes me a little sad because I have loved that there have been books for, because that's when a lot of kids drop off from reading. Now, I would absolutely love if not only did we maintain the age range of literally 12 to 18, we have a mix of books for everybody. I think young adult is doing pretty well when it comes to having more different voices in their stories, which is great. But we still lack books with boy protagonists in young adult. Great. We have them in middle grade, and then we have them in adult. And the few times that you do get a boy protagonist in what would seem like a young adult book, sometimes those get shelved in adult. And it makes me sad because there are studies that show it's right around that age when boys stop reading because a lot of times they're right there with the girls, and then they stop reading. And part of it, I think, is because it doesn't feel like there's anything for them anymore, and that makes me sad. I want in general, of course, all different kinds of voices in stories. And I think at that age, so much of it comes down to what you relate to. And I think adult is great. Adult in general, fiction is great for you gaining empathy. All books are, but I think when you're young, you want to feel a connection to something. And then as you get older, it's like you want that, but you also want to see other people's points of view. And not that young adult can't do that, but I think that it's so important that people have something that they feel like they are seen in a story. And anyway, again, I need to pull myself back in. I just think that this story does a great job of doing so many things for that age range.
So. I agree. I think it's funny that you mentioned that, because I was at my uncle's place earlier, and they have a 12-year-old boy who loved reading up until recently, and now he virtually doesn't read anything unless he has to read for school. Part of that is because he got a computer for Christmas and he plays video games on it all the time now. So it's not just because there aren't books that he's interested in. But I think you are right, and I think that this does fill that gap. And I feel like I am starting to see more of those kinds of books that are sort of towards the younger end of the YA. I mean, I know that you've said before that you feel like the Skyward series is in that kind of range as well, and I agree with you. Yeah. Are there any, this is like, I don't necessarily have any either, so I'm putting myself in a spot too, but do you think there are any books that you would recommend if people enjoyed this?
I'd have to think. I know I've recommended An Enchantment of Ravens, I think, because they both have the traveling love story aspect. They have that fairy tale feel, although that one's a little bit more familiar because of the fae aspect. But I think those two are kind of similar. I think that one leans a little more into the, like, not literal romance of the story, but that romantic feeling. Margaret Rogerson writes that way too in that book. I'd have to think, though, of other ones, because I'm trying to think of ones that feel slightly younger but have that, like, hopeful niceness to it, even when it has the sad moments. But I can't think of any. I mean, now I'm just thinking about books I like. I was gonna say, I feel like maybe if you read this when you're younger, and then you're looking for something that gets into maybe even heavier stuff and it really stays in it, I would say maybe like Strange the Dreamer, because there is that sense of like traveling and not really knowing where the plot is going. That one, I think, and they're both duologies. But you put me on the spot. I'm not sure. That's probably a terrible.
Yeah, no, I put myself on the spot too. I actually was, just as you were talking about, thinking about Once Upon a Broken Heart, which I think that you've read as well.
I know. I thought it was so fun.
It is fun, and I feel like it's kind of got that similar. I think that one can work for different audiences, because like if someone is on the younger end, they might not necessarily pick up on some of the more nuanced topics, but as they grew up and sort of thought back on that story, they'd get different things from it. Yes,
100%. There you go. Shadow the Fox would be fantastic, I think.
Yeah, I still need to continue with that trilogy. I started it and I've only read the first one.
The second one has pretty hard middle book syndrome, I'd say, but I liked the whole last. I don't want to ruin anything. I won't say anything. I just say, as a trilogy as a whole, I enjoyed it. The first one is my favorite, I think, but I did like it. Goes first, third, second, at least for me in this moment. It's very tropey, but Grisha, I think, is another. The original Grisha trilogy is another, like, it's kind of younger, and it definitely is much more a girl trying to find her place and things like that, where this one, I think Maya feels older than Alina does. But it's I definitely think Grisha's a little bit younger. But Yeah, I'm gonna stick to. I think the Julie Kagawa is a great one, and I'm gonna say if you're wanting to step up, it would not in quality necessarily, but just in maturity, I would say
Yeah.
Strange the Dreamer. Enchantment of Ravens is literally kind of another traveling love story, and then yeah, I'll stick with those ones,
Mm-hmm.
and then
And then, of
I'm
course,
sure
Six
other books.
Crimson Cranes.
Yeah, exactly. Six Crimson Cranes. It's so
And we're
cute.
getting the sequel this year, I think, for that one.
And I'm just dying to see the cover of it. I'm
Oh,
so
yeah,
excited
same.
to see the cover.
Same. Is that one a duology as well? I think it might be.
I think so.
There's not enough duologies.
We're getting a lot more of them,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of fun. I saw one person left a comment, and I thought it was kind of funny. I was like, I mean, I don't agree, but that's okay. It's not a big deal. But they were like, they didn't say it exactly like that, but they were basically saying like they hate duologies. It should either just be a standalone or a trilogy. And they're like, two books on the shelf is just weird. Like to only have two in a series. And I was like, I mean, I'm not concerned about that. But I like duologies
Yeah, so
personally.
do I.
I agree that
So
some
do
of
I.
them could be standalones, though. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
And some of them I wish were a little stretched out into trilogies, but I think that some of them, that's exactly where they belong, is two
Yeah.
books.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so many trilogies that I think you should have been a duology. That middle book did not need to happen
Yeah.
on its own. So I think that there's definitely a place for duologies. I quite enjoy them.
Yeah. And then also, it's very satisfying because you're
Mhm.
like, I'm done. I finished this series.
Yeah, yeah.
You feel so accomplished.
Yeah,
Not
I mean,
every
I
day.
did when I read these back to back and I got to like cross them off my
Yeah.
ongoing series list. It's very satisfying.
And then there's like Witcher, where you're like, there's the two collections of short stories, and there's 5 books in the series, and there's that other one. I don't know where that one fits in, so much
Yeah.
harder to get through. Like, I want to read Codex Alera, which I think is 6 books, and I'm
Mm,
excited, but at the same time, I'm like, 6 books.
yeah. And it's like I'm reading The Wheel of Time right now. Not like literally right now, but I'm in the process of reading Wheel of Time, and I'm like, I was going through my series and I was like, oh, and I have 10 books left in that one. Yikes.
I know. I read the first 4, and I was like, I think I'm good. It's not. I would only have read a couple more before the slog, and I'm like, I don't want to get into Wheel of Time.
Yeah. I've read the first 4 as well, so I think I'm most nervous about getting to book 6 because Lord of Chaos is really chonky, and I like long books. I just don't know how I'm going to feel about a Robert Jordan long book.
I know. I will. So on that topic, there's some books that, like, the Drowning Empire, is that what's called? The Bone Shard Daughter and Bone Shard Emperor.
Hmm.
It is, I have seen officially from the author, going to be a trilogy. And I'm a little
Okay, cool.
sad because I'm like, I actually want there to be like 5 books in that series because I think the world is so interesting. And I'm like, I don't want it to be over in one more book. Why? But anyway, I thought that a duology, I like duologies. I like that we're getting more of them because I don't feel like they used to be very common at all. I think maybe they used to push trilogies, and that's why you would get that kind of uncomfortable middle book sometimes. But I'm glad that I am a little nervous that we're starting to push duologies. And because I would imagine cheaper for the publisher to commit to 2 instead of 3. I don't know. I'm just gonna start talking out of my butt, so I'll not do that. But I won't do that. But
I thought a duology was a pretty good length for this story, though, because like you said, it kind of it feels like 4 books, but I think if she'd done 4 books, it would have been, even if they'd just been 4 short stories, I do feel like it would have been too much and it would have felt too disjointed. So actually having it with a first and second act and then a first and a second act kind of worked quite well here.
I thought so. I think we maybe have slightly unpopular opinions because this series I don't think is as loved, but I greatly enjoyed it. I really like the characters, and it makes me have the warm fuzzies, and any book that can give me the warm fuzzies, I tend to have a soft spot for. It didn't, shatter my heart into a million pieces necessarily. It didn't maybe hit some really, it doesn't have like the Kaladin character that you're just like, your struggle is just so, it doesn't have that. But it's just exactly what I wanted it to be, which is just pleasant, wholesome, but also sometimes surprisingly deep or heavy. It was a nice story. It's like watching a movie versus a TV show. I felt like I was taken on this tale, and then it was over and I was like, yay.
Yeah.
So that's how I feel. That the vague overview is how I feel about this duology.
I entirely agree. I enjoyed my time reading it. I felt like it was nice and fun and easy and comfortable, and it will stay in my mind, but it's not going to take up a whole load of space. And actually, that's kind of what I wanted and needed from it at the point that I read it. So, yeah,
It was fun.
It was fun. It was
Thank
fun.
you for putting that in to
Yeah.
It was fun. It was. I agree. Yay.
And that seems like a pretty good message to end on. So, thank you, Elle, for
Yeah,
joining
thanks
me.
for No, I like this series. I feel like none of my other friends like it, so it's nice to get to talk about it.
Yeah, it is nice. I had some other people who thought that they might kind of either read it or reread it, and then they didn't get around to it. So hopefully they will, and they'll experience the fun that we did. Thank you all for joining us and for commenting and telling us how you felt about the story. Again, I will have Elle's channel linked down in the description. If you do want to read Unravel the Dusk, then there is a channel for it over in my Discord, which is also linked down below. Thank you, Lisa, and have a nice day, night, afternoon, time, wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.